Ryan, I tried to find some pictures of you. I'm not sure which one is you. When I Googled, these came up. A couple weird ones came up too. So.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why that top right one's there, but okay.
I threw it in there for fun, but but yeah, I like that. So just really thanks, Ryan. I appreciate you taking time here to join us. Man, bear, pig. Yeah, yeah. I don't even know what that's from. I think it's some cartoon somewhere. So, uh, yeah. So, enterprise scripture, tools, scripts, and tricks to make your life easier. So I'll just hand over to you because I can't stop laughing right now. But thank you again for your time on a Friday, and all yours.
If I remember how to share. Okay. See my screen yet?
Yeah, whiz.
Yeah, so I did want to call this out real quick because it's a big vulnerability that was just published in the last like 3 days. It's affecting Linux machines in Azure. If somebody tries to connect to the Linux machine in Azure with no authentication, they get root access. So it's a pretty big one. It's affecting Linux machines that are enrolled in any of these services. So Azure Automation, Azure Automatic Update, whatnot. Apparently Microsoft installs a client on the machine to manage that service, but they have no way to update that client. And then this vulnerability was found. So if you have Linux machines enrolled in any of these services, look up the CVEs and follow the guidance to update your VM clients, because as of today, it's actively being exploited by botnets. So just wanted to throw that out there before we get into the talk. See how many people suddenly drop because they have Linux machines in Azure. All right. When I put together this presentation, I decided to let artificial intelligence design the slides for me. So that's why it looks pretty nice. But yeah, I'm Ryan Ephgrave. I'm a senior software engineer at Big Bank. This is the enterprise scripter. So first off, who am I? I'm a 5-time Microsoft MVP, self-proclaimed automation expert. I do a lot with automation. That's pretty much always been what I've been doing for the past probably decade. One of the main people who helped build out the automation team at Big Bank. Been doing that, I think 4 years, maybe 5, I don't know, time flies. And Twitter's the effing posh. That's probably, if anyone wanted to reach out to me, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. But so what is this talk? I didn't want to do a talk where I did a lot of demos, because I kind of more wanted to talk about what are the things that we adopted as a team? Like, what are the processes we adopted, or what are the tools we adopted that really helped accelerate our ability to do automations inside of Big Bank? So in terms of, I wanted to answer a lot of the questions on this slide, like what would I need to make an automation team? Where are the places that PowerShell falls short? And PowerShell falling short is not a dig on PowerShell. It's not meant to do everything. So where should I bring in another tool? Where should I build another tool? Things like that. Wanted to answer a lot of these questions, and then depending on questions and whatnot, if we have time at the end, I do have a demo for some tools we've built. I do have like a demo for some. It's kind of like a really cool thing that I know PowerShell can do that I don't really see many people doing. So I do have a little bit of code demo at the end, because it feels weird to not have code demos in a talk for me. So first off, our team is an Agile team, and at Big Bank, there's a huge push to make every team Agile. And I don't think in general it makes a lot of sense for everybody, but for automation, it has worked out really well. when we first started the team years ago, we tried to make it an agile team. And we adopted certain parts of the agile methodology. And then as time went on, we got better and better at it. And there's a lot of it that really makes sense. The first big piece of it is our sprints. That really works very well, especially in automations when you're doing smaller projects. To organize your work, and we do 2-week sprints ourselves, but you can do any number of sprints that make sense for your team. Even if you're a team of one, I would still probably try to follow some of the agile stuff, because the idea behind the sprint is at the beginning of the sprint, you say, I'm going to do these like 3 or 4 things in the next 2 weeks. And those are the main things you work on. You don't work on anything else. And then once the 2 weeks are up, you pick your next 2 weeks worth of stuff, and go so on and so on. And the idea behind it is, with such a shorter time span, you're able to basically right the ship if something's kind of going weird. Like it doesn't take months to find out that, like, oh, the client doesn't like something or something like that. For me personally, I don't do well if there's no deadline. If something's due in a few months, I'm going to wait till the last second, but it's very helpful having things due every 2 weeks. So sprints are very helpful for our team. The other thing, especially if you're going to be building out a team or doing anything in terms of trying to introduce automation, the idea in Agile of having retrospectives after every sprint is very, very helpful, because the idea behind a retrospective is you meet as a team and you just spend like 30 minutes talking about what has worked over the last sprint, what hasn't worked, and like what are things you want to work on. So like one of our last retrospectives, we were talking about how we had really, really good documentation for our internal documentation for our own development teams, but our end user documentation wasn't all that great for people to use our tools. So that was something that we're going to start working on. And the idea behind the retrospective is, if you say you want to start working on it, the next sprint you actually work on it. So then that's now an action item of the next sprint to start working on. It allows you to do little changes to your team when problems are small. Ideally, it helps you not start forming bad habits, because you're able to reflect so much quicker before the bad habits turn into lots of larger things. Backlog refinement I put on here because that's another super helpful thing. So the idea behind backlog refinement is every 2 weeks during a sprint, you meet and you say, hey, these are the next 2 weeks worth of work that we want to do. How much work are these? Do I know that I have all of the work ready to go? Is there anything I'm going to be waiting on? Like, am I waiting on permissions in order to do this, so I can't actually work on it yet, or things like that? Like, backlog refinement's all about setting up your work for the next 2 weeks so that you can do your work and just get into it. You don't have to try to figure out what you want to do from a day-to-day perspective. You have your entire 2 weeks planned out. And then the MVP concept, I'm not talking about having like a Microsoft MVP on your team, but that does help. Specifically, what I'm talking about with MVP is the minimum viable product. And this is, I apply this to as much as I can. The whole idea behind it is just get up and running and get started doing whatever it is you want to do, and then fix it along the way. So the idea behind MVP, if somebody's asking for some huge automation, start small. Give them a smaller piece of it that they can start using immediately, and then they can start using it and give you great feedback. Because generally speaking, if you're building something for someone else and you just send them a screenshot and you're like, does this work? You're going to get a lot of different feedback than if you send them the tool and say, hey, try this out. Is it doing what you want it to do? Those are two very different experiences from the end user, and they're going to give you much better experiences. And then just tools that help you work. Our team uses Jira. It was forced on us. It's all right. Like we would probably pick Azure DevOps if we had any choice in the matter, just because our code is stored there. But those are some tools. So now that we got the process pieces out, does anyone have any questions on Agile? I don't actually see the chat, so I clicked out. There we go. Tooling. I really liked this slide that artificial intelligence made for me because I put in the top that you need a hammer. This is like your go-to tool, and it uses a wrench image. I thought that was kind of funny. There are actually a few different tools to pick from. None of them were a hammer. But now that we've kind of gotten out of the process and how I would say how our team actually decided to organize and what I think worked for our team, let's get into like the tools and what you're going to need in order to actually do the scripting, to do the automations. And the first thing you're going to need is a multi-purpose tool that is kind of going to be your go-to thing. For us, it's SMA. That's the System Center Service Management Automation. There's an on-prem version. I believe they're even refreshing it for the next version of System Center. I don't know if that's 2021 or 2022. And by refreshing it, I mean they're just releasing what was last released in 2007. The next version of SMA is Azure Automation. We're going to be moving to that. The reason that I really like SMA and the reason I really like Azure Automation is they don't have a lot of features. They just kind of get out of your way and let you do the automations, which I really like. So in terms of just a general purpose tool, since they just basically let you run PowerShell, and PowerShell could do is a ton. You don't have to worry about writing configuration files or anything like that. You just run the scripts, which is great. Another one that's out there is called PowerShell Universal. I've never used this all that much. It's written by Adam Driscoll, but I see it recommended all the time by a lot of really smart people. And Adam Driscoll's an MVP. I think that his full-time job is working on the Universal stuff. And it's a whole automation system that looks like it would work really well. Another one that's there is Ansible. I wanted to kind of call this out because I do see people suggesting it. It would not work for our team. That's not to say it wouldn't work for anyone, but Ansible is very much it does configuration management automation, meaning I want to configure a server to do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of its bread and butter. It can do other kinds of automation, but it's kind of all centered around configuration management. So for at least us, we felt like we'd be fighting the tool a lot, and we didn't want to fight the tool for our multi-purpose, this is the main tool you're using type thing. So, yeah, SMA is what we use. We're going to be going to Azure Automation, and we're fine on those. Those are really good tools. Azure Automation is not a dead platform. It's kind of like System Center Configuration Manager. A lot of people seem to think it's dead, but they're still working on it. They're still updating it, and there's not anything that has fully replaced it. So Azure Automation is still good. It's been out for like over a decade now, I think. So the next thing that we have, and it's not really database, but having a way to store structured data. If you're going to get deep into automations, if you're going to be doing automations, you're going to need pretty quickly. I think every single automation that we do has some work running in a database in terms of like a custom database that we wrote, not just the database that that's in the product, right? Whatever product we're automating. So you don't necessarily need a database. You can have like SharePoint, a CMS content management system. That's what SharePoint is. Anything that allows you to store structured data, because there's so many different things that you're going to need to do, and it's going to give you. PowerShell doesn't have any answer to storing data for a very long time. So having a place where you can store that data, so you can have like job records that last for years, or you could create your own audit log, or you can do anything that you want. Definitely have a database somewhere. moving up my slides. Another thing that I would highly recommend, you get about 70 to 80% of our automations use some sort of workflow or UI. And I'm not talking PowerShell workflow. I'm talking about the ability to track an automation over the course of multiple days. This is something that a database can help a lot with if you wanted to roll your own, which is down here, like roll your own. But there's also a lot of other tools out there that'll let you do it. So you can do it inside of SharePoint. I know a number of automation teams use SharePoint to do this, and SharePoint works really well with Power Apps. So those are good. There's Ansible, Flow, and Logic apps have the great workflows, and then PowerShell Universal. Being able to have a UI and some sort of workflow allows you to do things like, I want to do this really, I want to like stop a deployment and then get somebody to approve that deployment before, it goes out. So with just straight PowerShell, you can't really do that very well. You need some way for a user to interact with you, either a graphical user interface, or you can like send an email, one of those like, do you like me, yes, no things, and just have them click yes or no. Do you want to go through? Whatever you want for there. But some way to interact with people is very much needed for automation. And most of those have that in. I also wanted to spend, there's a number of slides on this because source control is, it's where all your code is stored, but it's so much more than that. It's how you interact with other teams in your organization. It's how you interact with the rest of the world if you want to open source your stuff. It's going to be security policies and procedures, deploy. There's so much involved in source control. And you don't need to do it all right away. Definitely going back to the whole concept of MVP. That's why I have this roadmap for how you can get started with the source control. But first off, I do also want to say that, so if you don't know much about source control, and you're looking to start, the idea behind it is just you store your scripts in, it's kind of like OneDrive, but for code, where you can track changes, but it also has a ton of, a lot of collaboration pieces, so that you can collaborate with other people on the code. And Git is the kind of industry standard at this point. If you pick something else because you know it very well. But if you're not really sure where to start with, always start with Git. Git is kind of like a zip file format. Just because WinZip has zip in the name doesn't mean it's the only product that can zip something. Same with Git. Just because like GitHub is the thing that everyone thinks of when they think of Git doesn't mean other things can't do Git. Anything that stores code can probably do Git. Azure DevOps, there's Azure DevOps, there's GitHub, there's GitLab. Our team uses Azure DevOps. And then yeah, there's GitHub, and I wanted to throw a non-Microsoft one on there too, so I threw on GitLab because I hear a lot of good things about it. In terms of the roadmap that I put up here, I'm going to go more into depth on this, but this is more things that you can do to get started with source control to kind of like incrementally get better as you go on. So the idea being, first off, just when you first get started with the source control, just organize your stuff. Get everything in figure out what your format's going to be. This is our format. We have everything in one source code repository because managing like 100 did not sound helpful. So we just have all of it in one for all of our PowerShell, I should say. Our C# separate, but all of our PowerShell stuff's in one. We have 3 root folders. We have assets, which is what stores all of our variables, schedules, the non-PowerShell stuff, things that we deploy out. Then we have modules. Those are just the PowerShell modules that we've developed. And then there's our projects. So inside of projects are where our runbooks are stored. But there's other things that can go with a project. So like if we have like a peer approval project, we'll have stuff in there for the peer approvals. Well, if we have a project to kind of like create a bunch of collections in Config Manager, that'll go all over there. If we have stuff for VDIs, we'll do stuff there. But yeah, we break it all down into projects. It's not using this that's important. It's being consistent, whatever you do. As long as you are consistent, anything can be changed pretty easily with a script. So as long as you're consistent, it doesn't really matter what your organization is. You just have to be consistent. And everybody who brings it in is consistent. So first off, you want to organize your stuff. Then you want to figure out a branch strategy. And the idea behind a branch strategy, first off, do what works for you. There's like 30 or 40 different published branch strategies and even more after that. Just kind of look at a few. But the idea behind a branch strategy is you want everyone to be on the same page of how code gets into master, because master should always be deployable. So master is like your gold code. This is code that is no longer in development. It is secure. It works. We know it works. We can deploy it out to production today. So your branch strategy is just written down. How does code get to that state? What is the journey it goes there? These two pictures I put on are indicative of actually how our branch strategy has changed over time. So first, this top one is a more complex branch strategy that we actually started with. We started with this more complex one. And the idea was you have your master branch, which is your production stuff. And then we had a develop branch that was just our development stuff. And we even had, so I copied these from a guide. We even had a UAT branch as well that was pretty static. And you'd break off a feature off of your develop branch, code it, put it in your develop. Then you'd have to merge it into UAT, and then you'd have to merge it into master in order to get it there. It was much more complex. It took a while to get stuff to master, and it also caused a lot of conflict errors between the branches, which was not fun. So we ended up reevaluating, and we went with a much simpler form, which is you have master, and you just very simply, if I want to, if I have all of my code and I want to just add a function to a module, just make a new feature branch for that function, code it, put it back in, and put it right back into master. This allows us to be much quicker with how we get code out. We have a lot less issues with merge conflicts. The only downside to this is you always have to make sure that you structure any of your code in such a way that you can make small changes without breaking existing projects. So like in my example, I was adding a new function. As long as no one calls that function, I really don't care if it gets into master right away and gets deployed out. If nobody's calling it, who cares? But if I edited an existing function, I'm going to need to make sure all of my edits work very well with all of the existing code, and anything that needs to be updated is updated if I edit an existing procedure in such a way that whatever's calling it needs to be updated. So find some sort of branch strategy, read them up. They're good to have. This is kind of probably your next thing that you should do. And once you find a good branch strategy, protect your master branch, protect your main branch. Every single source code provider, GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, all of them have the ability to make it so that nobody can directly edit code in your master branch. You should only be directly editing code in branches that are for development. So make sure that you protect that so that nobody can directly edit code, which goes right into the peer review. If you can't directly edit code in master, how does it get there? you have to do what's called a pull request. And the idea is a pull request is I have a host of changes and I say, okay, these are all the changes I want to make to our production environment. Let's merge them in. Even if you're a team of one, I would suggest you guys do pull requests, because pull requests are super nice for like putting together a report of all the changes that went in. It's really hard to do that off of commits. Having the pull requests to generate like change logs and stuff like that, super nice. And if you have a team of more than one, your pull requests turn into your peer review. And with the peer review, what you do is you have your coworker look over it. You can not only protect master so that no one can directly edit it, you can also protect master so that nobody can put code into master without first having that code approved. Every single line of that code needs to be approved before it goes in. So set that up if you have more than one member. After, not right away again. If you do everything all at once, it's going to be hard. So do it incrementally. Once you get to the point where you feel comfortable doing peer reviews, enable that security, and then start with your peer reviews. So I have here, start making sure the code works. That's the first thing you should do, and you'd be surprised how often that that'll fail, where it worked on the development machine, but it's not working in, it's worked on the development machine, it might have worked in QA, but it doesn't work everywhere. So just make sure the code works at the start, and then start, layering on more stuff. Maybe if you guys do testing of your code in terms of pester test and unit tests, which I highly recommend, but that could be further down the road. But require pester tests. Do security reviews. If somebody's doing SQL queries, make sure there's no sort of SQL injection. If somebody needs to do anything with an account, make sure their account permissions aren't expanded anymore. Did they suddenly take an account that says like SQL read and give it like full SA permissions in SQL? Maybe that shouldn't be done. So start looking, and this is where you start adding in all of your peer review. And then the last piece of it's deploy. And this is another thing that you can incrementally add on. The idea behind deploy is just right at the start, just write like deploy.ps1, that whenever you want to make a change to production, that's what you run. And then as time goes on, you can add it to what's called CI/CD. That's a continuous integration, continuous deployment. The idea being you can just automatically deploy out to production once it's done. Our team does that. We have, it's not automatic because people are scared at Wells of that for some reason. But we have another team, is what they said. They said another team would do the deploy for you. So another team hits the go button instead of us just scheduling the go button to go at a specific time. Okay, but yeah, the idea is if your deploy is completely automated and all of the configuration is just automatically sent out, it's a lot simpler. And there's a lot less room for error. So it's definitely very helpful. Then I did put an animated GIF in, but I couldn't make it animated in PowerPoint Web for some reason. Prove your worth. This is something that I think all teams should do that are automation, because in tech, teams tend to be a black hole for money. Organizations will give you money and you tell the organization, trust me being here is saving you money, but it's kind of hard to show that. It's not always so clear cut. For automation, especially if you're taking an existing process, it is actually pretty clear cut. You know about how much time the process takes, you know how often you're running, and you know how much time your new improved process takes the people. So if somebody has to do an approval, maybe it took a 20-minute process down to 2 minutes. If nobody has to do an approval, it might have just wiped out 20 minutes worth of work every time we run. But you want to track that so that you can show to upper management. I will say that our team has been not very great at this over the past few years. We started out pretty good, and now we've gotten into a point where everyone just knows that we're really good. So we haven't had to prove it for a while. But that's actually been another call out we've had, that we're going to start getting back into doing this. But even if you don't have that information, like you don't know, like, okay, every time I create a collection for someone, it saves 5 minutes. If you haven't figured that out, still track everything so that you can figure it out later. Like, I don't care if you figure it out a year from now. Once you figure out how much time that's saving, if you have all of your job logs over the past year, you can apply it back then and know how much you've saved the company. So one of the things I would highly recommend, if your automation tool that's running your jobs is pruning your information, like use your database, use SharePoint list, or use whatever to back up that data so that you are able to go back and run reports and show people, oh, these are the amazing things that I've saved the company. So this way you can, always backdate your work. There been any questions on all this stuff?
Pretty quiet so far. One thing on your last comments here, Ryan, that we have done in the past, like you said, proving your worth and tracking it. I think we even at some point had like kind of a standard for run books that we had where they all wrote to a database so that we could just easily put all this information in one place. So kind of like the logging mechanism. So you would like track the job that you ran, and then later on you could marry that, like you said, to how much time this specific module would have normally taken, so that we could do some quick math. So I agree, right? You do have to show the value, and a year or two from now, people are going to forget about all those things that are automated. So we've had targets on backs of automation teams where we've been able to, as long as we're logging that worth, that definitely shows some value. And kind of like everything else you do and config man and everything else, it's not until it's broken do people start to realize what you were doing for them, kind of thing. So definitely important to try to keep track of this somehow.
Yeah, definitely. Should have taken a sip of water while you were talking. All right. So I have one more slide before I get into kind of the demos, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how we organize our code, because you can get into kind of issues if you don't have kind of an idea of how the code is going to be organized. So for our PowerShell code, all of our code is backed up in, I should say 99% of our code's in modules, and our runbooks then just call our modules. So the way that we have our modules layered is at the very bottom would be like the system modules. So for instance, we work with Azure Automation and SMA. So these are the like we have Git automation variable. Like that's going to help us figure out what that's going to help us target different servers depending on the environment. But that's kind of the lowest level. What are the system ones? And then we have our shared modules. So these are modules that we've written in our organization that can be shared out to other teams because they are so not specific to anything that we're doing. So that means like our SQL interaction module. We have a custom module that we use to interact with SQL. We have a credential module that we use to get like GMSA credentials. We use it to run code as other users. That would be down level on the shared modules. Then at the next layer, we have our team modules. So these are modules that aren't necessarily project specific, but they are specific to our team, and that we wouldn't necessarily share them out because they have kind of personal to our team stuff in them. So one of the new modules that fits this pattern that we did recently, we called it SQL Query Store. And the idea behind it is you just, instead of before, what we would have to do in all of our runbooks is do like invoke SQL query and put your SQL query in, which made our runbooks more complex than they had to be because you have to embed an entire SQL query or put it in a file somewhere. So with the SQL query store, you just store all the SQL files in the module itself, and then you just call it and you say what's the name of the SQL file you want to run, and then you tell it what's the stored connection you want to run it as. So all of our SQL stuff is now just turned into one line where we say invoke SQL query store. That would be an example of a team module, because we're not necessarily going to give those SQL queries out to all the other teams, because they're not going to have direct permissions to our databases, but it's not project specific. Then we have project specific ones to run more complex processes for a project. Like if we have to move data between two different databases, we'll do that inside the module, or other things like that. And then there's our runbooks. The runbooks we try to keep pretty simple. We're not always successful with that, but we try to keep it simple because they're harder to test. They're harder to work with. They don't have access to the file system, so you can't store like SQL files with them. So we just try to make like we'll put like if branches of logic in there and maybe like for each, but we're not going to do a ton of logic inside the runbook. It's going to be offloaded to our modules. So this is how we've organized our code in order to be able to keep it easily maintainable, easily workable. We have these different domains where we where something that's like something that as a system module, we're not really going to worry too much about it, or like we're not going to put in any of our shared modules, like our SQL module, stuff that's unique to our team or unique to a project. We try to keep those barriers there because it makes it easier to maintain down the road, at least in my opinion. So try to think that through. Don't keep everything when you're building out modules, when you're doing stuff inside of PowerShell, try to have an idea of how this is going to work, especially look for reusability of code. Like for instance, if some of our system modules changed, right, where we have like get automation variable, that's going to tell us what SQL server we're going to be hitting or something like that. If we moved to a new platform and we had a new way of getting that information, we could swap out the system modules without having to change a bunch of the code anywhere else, because most of the calls for that modules it's going to be looped into some of our shared modules or things like that. So when you keep these things segregated, you can make it so that you can swap different modules out without having to re-architect your entire code base. So that's very helpful. So that was it on the direct presentation. Then I wanted to show, let's see. All right. I wanted to show, we'll start out with one. I'm sure we'll see about the time's at. I can pull out as many tricks as I need for the last 20 minutes. But so I put this, and let me share the link because I put it up on GitHub. There we go. This is a link to the presentation. There's some links in the presentation when I talked about, I think Git branching. I put a link to an article talking about Git branching. So that slide has a link, but there's other notes and stuff in there if you wanted to look through them. And then there's also this code repository. And the one thing that I wanted to talk about that I've never found a really reason to talk about, but I use it all of the time, and I use it all of the time for local dev tools. So things that I've written for myself, for my team to use in order to write stuff. And I really think that that's something that should be something that you take into consideration when you write your own tools. Like make it easy for you to use your own tools. You don't want to make things hard on yourself just because you know how to do it. Make it as easy as possible. So this is called the argument completer. So I've seen a lot of people talk about this, but generally when they talk about it as this module here, register argument completer. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to take an existing sorry, my manager was messaging me. She likes to just message hi, which is always great. So yeah, register argument completer. The purpose of this is if somebody wrote a module and you want to add an argument completer, and what an argument completer is, let me pull something up. So like, name. So argument completer is going to like complete these out when you do tab completion. So this is an example of an argument completer. So you can just start typing. So I want just add ones and it will complete out your argument. You can register these on commands that don't already have them, but you can also add them, and I don't see this as much, to your functions right here. So I wrote in this module, there's a that I shared. This is actually a function that we use. Just to point out, it is inspired by Wells Fargo code. It is not Wells Fargo code, but it's inspired by code that we use. Because we use get automation variable all the time, and we don't actually have get automation variable doesn't work outside of the context of like SMA or Azure Automation. So how do we run these files locally? So what we do is, this is an example of our repository. So if, let me see, where's the zoom in? Is it not under? There we go. So over here, this is like in this presentation where I gave an example. I've recreated our general makeout of our branch. And so I have my assets folder, I have my variables folder, and then we have our variables here. And the variable is just a variable JSON file with the dev, UAT, and prod, so that you can see what the value is in every environment and your description. And then for our development tools, we have our own version of get automation variable that uses that information to get us the right variable based on our environment. So what does this do? First, it gets the automation environment. We use environment variables for that. This isn't the environment variable we use, but we use environment variables for that. So I just set automation. Not great without tab complete. So just set that as dev, and now if I ran that, it would get dev, but I don't think I put it in my PSD1 file. Yeah, that's not being exported, so I can't use it. Sorry, but yeah, this is just going to return what our environment variable is. So I have my automation environment. I know where my script variables are. And then what I do is I say, hey, if the variable name exists, so my cool variable exists, get the content of that file and return the environment variable of it. So now with this function, wherever I call get automation variable in my scripts, in my development, it'll actually give me the real value for the environment, and I can switch it pretty easily. I can go into UAT, and now all my stuff is going to be UAT. Switch back to dev, or I can go to prod. Using the environment variables allows you to switch real quickly with your development tools. The thing that I wanted to show, so if I do module, another thing that we do that is very, very helpful. Another thing we do is very, very helpful is we put at the beginning of our modules a little basically note saying that we did this. So for here, I did EA for effing admin. I could have done BB for big bank, but just some way that I know that my team did it. So all of our modules are prefaced with the same two characters. But if I import that, let me do a force. Now if I do get automation variable name, it auto completes my cool variable. Why is that? Because I have an argument completer. So here's how you do argument completers, and I think this is why they're not used a lot. Line 5 and 6 are boilerplate. These are the parameters for them. This is the argument completer. You can't change these. These are just, this is the information you have to work with to complete the argument. I love doing this line 8. So if you see line 8, what I'm doing is, I should say I don't like doing this because I think it's really dumb that I have to do it. But generally speaking, if I'm inside a PowerShell module, if I access something that's on the script scope, I'm accessing variables that are unique to the module. So this is stuff that the module itself loaded. For some reason, argument completers don't have access to that. So if you want to get a module's variables, what you have to do is you do this line here. You do get module. You do get module EADEV, and then invoke a command, and now I'm going to get the script variable names. So why do I do this? I do this with most of my argument completers that are inside of modules. The reason I do this is every single time, if I'm doing get so every single time I'm typing, every character I type, it's rerunning the logic here. So if I'm trying to hit the file system every single time I type something, and potentially parsing 100 different files looking for this specific word to complete, that could cause your tools to be not very performative. So generally speaking, when I use argument completers inside a module, in the PSM1 file, when I load the module, right here, I get the variable names. So I get all of the variables in that folder, and I store them once inside the module. So in my argument completers, I'm not re-hitting the file system every single time I type anything. I'm just getting what's already stored in the module. So I'm getting the module, invoking a command during the module, in the scope of the module to get back the variable names, which is just one line of code. It's just annoying you have to do it. And then I go through all of the variables there, and I say, hey, if the variables like the word to complete. So this word to complete, when I start typing, get automation variable name, my word to complete is going to be K. Now it's going to be KA, KAY. That's going to be the word to complete. So word to complete asterisk, and then I just return back the completion result, which is what it expects. So what's kind of funny is for my argument completers, it's pretty boilerplate. No matter what I do, it's almost always just to pull out old notepad. The only thing that ever changes in any of my argument completers is the highlighted line. I just pick a different variable for what I'm comparing against. Otherwise, inside the argument completers, it's all boilerplate. All does the same thing. I just copy and paste these around. But it really helps with the developer experience because I don't know if anyone else is like that, but when I can never remember like how I wrote my variable names. I might do IE instead of LE. Like I mistype all the times, and tab completion is very much needed. So if I run that get automation variable, it returns back value in dev, which is the dev value. I can update that, and now it's going to return back value in UAT. So it just allows me to switch between the different environments while I'm coding. And the argument completer I've seen people talk about them, but I've not seen anyone use the actual attribute to do the argument completer. So any questions on that? Any questions in general? Because that's the rest of my the content I had prepared. I talked a little quicker.
All good, Ryan. Thanks. Really appreciate it. I think this is good, really, to help people get a perspective, like you said, on enterprise scripting. I know for a long time I spent a lot of time just file shares and disorganized, and there is a ton of value in getting these things into Git and everything else here. I think there's a ton of helpful things on the journey to enterprise scripting.
Yeah, and definitely also I have my Twitter stuff in there. You can reach out on Twitter. I'm pretty active there.
Very good. Anybody from the audience, any questions or additional tips, any things that you see in what you're doing and how getting into a more structured script management has added value or reached chaos or avoided chaos?
If you see my screen, I'm in the whatchamacallit, the GitHub, the AI that'll write your own code for you. I'm just tab completing out what it thinks I should write.
Huh. I haven't even seen that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I forget what it's called, but it'll write most of your script for you. Yeah.
Slick. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate it. And let's see. Yeah, I don't know if you saw it in the chat earlier, Ryan, but you said you're a self-proclaimed script expert or something like that. Is that what you said?
Yeah, automation expert.
Okay, so we hereby proclaim you an automation expert. You can choose whether to say self-proclaimed or not. You can just say
okay.
yeah.
Been voted on.
Yeah. At least 2 of us voted. So yeah, motion carried. So yeah, all good. So yes, really appreciate it. Thank you. Let me share screen. We're going to have another raffle, and then we're actually going to skip the break and go right into the next section here after that raffle. But let's come back over here.